I taught my dog to use talking buttons. What she told me terrified me. I want to tell you about my dog, Biscuit. And I want to tell you what she said to me. Not barked. Not whimpered. Said. With words. With buttons that spoke in a calm, robotic female voice every time her small, delicate paw pressed down on them. But before I get to what she said, before I tell you the thing that made me leave my house at 2 in the morning with nothing but my keys and my dog and drive to a motel 40 miles away, I need you to understand something. I am not crazy. I am not superstitious. I have a degree in behavioral psychology. I understand conditioning, pattern recognition, cause and effect. I know how dogs think. Or at least, I thought I did. It started in the fall. Late September. The kind of September where the air can't decide if it's still summer or already dying, and the light turns amber an hour too early. I had just moved into a small rental house on the edge of town, nothing special, just a 2-bedroom with a narrow yard backed up against a line of pine trees. The previous tenants had left in a hurry. The landlord said they'd broken their lease early, something about a job transfer. He seemed eager to fill the place, gave me the first month half off. I should have asked more questions. I didn't. I was coming off a bad year. A relationship that ended the way relationships end when one person stops pretending, suddenly, and with a lot of silence afterward. I had moved to a new city for a fresh start, taken a position as an administrative coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company. The work was tedious. The people were fine. My supervisor, Dale, was the kind of man who stood a little too close when he talked to you and laughed a beat too late at his own jokes. Harmless, I told myself. Just awkward. Everyone has a Dale in their office. The house felt too quiet. That's why I got Biscuit. She was at the county shelter, tucked into a kennel at the far end of the row, the spot they put the dogs that had been there longest. A papillon mix, mostly papillon, with those enormous butterfly ears and dark, wet eyes that tracked you with an almost unsettling intelligence. She was maybe 3 years old, no history, no chip, no name. Just a small, silent dog sitting perfectly still in a concrete cell, watching me like she'd been waiting. I knelt down. She walked to the front of the kennel, pressed her nose against the chain link, and stared at me. Not the desperate, tail-wagging plea most shelter dogs give you. Something quieter. Something more deliberate. Like she was deciding whether I was worth trusting. I signed the papers that afternoon. The first few weeks were normal. Biscuit was calm, almost eerily well-behaved for a shelter dog. She didn't chew. She didn't bark. She followed me from room to room with a quiet attentiveness, always positioning herself between me and the nearest door. At night, she slept at the foot of my bed, curled into a tight circle, her ears twitching at every sound. And there were sounds. The house made them, the settling kind, the pipes in the walls kind, the wind pushing against old windows kind. Normal sounds. But Biscuit would lift her head at them, those huge ears rotating like satellite dishes, and stare into the dark hallway with an intensity that made my skin prickle. It's just the house, I'd tell her. Old houses talk. She'd look at me. Then back at the hallway. Then she'd settle down again, but her ears never fully relaxed. I started the buttons in October. I'd seen the videos online, dogs using augmentative communication devices, pressing buttons that said words like outside, play, food, water. The research behind it was legitimate, rooted in the same principles as AAC devices used for nonverbal humans. I'd studied it in grad school. The idea wasn't that dogs understand language the way we do, it's that they can learn to associate specific buttons with specific outcomes, and over time, begin to combine them in ways that suggest something deeper than simple conditioning. I ordered a starter set. 12 buttons. Each one recorded with a single word in a clear, neutral voice. I spent a weekend arranging them on a foam board in the living room, color-coded by category. Blue buttons, food, water, treat. Green buttons, outside, walk, play. Yellow buttons, love, happy, scratch. Red buttons, help, hurt, scared. And one white button, off to the side, stranger. I added stranger almost as an afterthought. I'd read about dogs who used buttons to alert their owners to unfamiliar people, delivery drivers, neighbors, anyone the dog didn't recognize as part of the household. It seemed practical, useful, even. A talking doorbell, essentially. I modeled the buttons for weeks. Every time I fed Biscuit, I'd press food and say the word. Every time we went for a walk, I'd press outside and walk. When the mail carrier came, I'd press stranger and point at the door. Biscuit watched all of this with those dark, calculating eyes, her head tilting slightly, her ears forward. She pressed her first button on October 14th, food. Right before dinner. I nearly cried. I gave her 3 treats and pressed happy over and over, and she wagged her tail, one of the few times I'd seen her do it, and pressed food again. Within 2 weeks, she was using 6 buttons reliably. Food, water, outside, play, scratch, and happy. She'd press outside when she needed to go to the yard, scratch when she wanted belly rubs, happy when I came home from work. It was remarkable. It was the most connected I'd felt to another living being in years. By November, I'd expanded to 20 buttons. I added smell, hear, see, night, home, bed, and a few others. Biscuit took to them with a facility that surprised even me. She wasn't just pressing single buttons anymore, she was combining them. Outside play. Food, water. Scratch, happy. And then, on a cold Tuesday night in mid-November, she pressed a combination that changed everything. I was in bed, reading. It was past 11. The house was quiet, that heavy, thick quiet that only comes in the dead hours when even the settling sounds have stopped. Biscuit was lying on the floor beside the bed, and I assumed she was asleep. Then I heard it. The soft, mechanical click of a button being pressed in the living room. Stranger. The voice was tinny and flat in the silence. I looked down at Biscuit. She was standing, rigid, her ears fully erect, staring at the bedroom door. Biscuit? I whispered. She padded out of the room. I heard another click. Stranger. Then another. Night. Stranger. Night. I got out of bed. My feet were bare on the cold hardwood, and I remember the feeling of it, that shock of chill running up through my soles. The hallway was dark. I hadn't left any lights on. I walked slowly toward the living room, my hand trailing along the wall. Biscuit was standing in front of her button board, absolutely still. Her ears were pointed toward the front window. She pressed the button again. Stranger. I looked at the window. The curtains were drawn. I couldn't see anything. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The wind pushed against the glass. A branch scraped against the side of the house. Normal sounds. I checked the front door, locked. Checked the back door, locked. Looked out every window. Nothing. Just the empty yard, the dark pines, the cold. "There's no one there, baby," I said. Biscuit looked at me. Looked at the window. Pressed stranger one more time. Then she walked back to the bedroom and lay down. It happened again 3 nights later. And then again the following week. Always between 11 and 1 in the morning. Always the same pattern, stranger. Night. Sometimes stranger. Smell. Night. As if she was telling me she could smell someone. Outside. In the dark. I told myself it was animals. Raccoons. A stray cat. Deer coming down from the hills. Dogs can smell things from remarkable distances. A person walking on the sidewalk 2 houses down would register. A neighbor taking out the trash. It didn't have to mean anything sinister. But here's the thing about Biscuit. She never pressed stranger during the day when the mail carrier came anymore. She never pressed it when the neighbors walked by. She seemed to have learned the difference between the expected strangers, the ones who belonged in the rhythm of the day. And whatever this was, whatever she was smelling at night, this was different. And she wanted me to know it. December came. The days got short and gray. I'd been at the logistics company for 3 months now, long enough to settle into the routine, long enough to stop noticing things I should have noticed sooner. Dale, my supervisor. He'd always been a little too friendly. A hand on my shoulder that lingered. Comments about how I looked always phrased just carefully enough to seem like compliments rather than what they were. "You should wear your hair down more often, Emily. It frames your face." That kind of thing. I'd smile tightly and change the subject. I was good at that. Years of practice. But in December, it got worse. He started appearing in places he shouldn't have been. The break room when I was there alone. The parking garage at exactly the time I left. He mentioned a restaurant I'd been to over the weekend, a small place, not the kind of place you'd go unless you knew about it. When I asked how he knew, he said someone had mentioned it. He didn't say who. I started keeping my office door open. I started leaving at slightly different times each day. Small adjustments. The kind of things women learn to do so early in life that we don't even think about them as survival strategies. They're just how we move through the world. December 18th. A Wednesday. I'll never forget it because it was the day I stopped being able to tell myself I was imagining things. I came home from work at the usual time, around 5:30. It was already dark. The porch light was on, I always left it on. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and Biscuit was there, waiting. But not the way she usually waited. She wasn't pressing happy. She wasn't wagging her tail. She was standing in the middle of the living room, completely rigid, her ears flat against her head. And as I closed the door behind me, she walked to her button board and pressed 3 buttons in deliberate, measured sequence. Stranger. Home. Smell. I stood there. My coat still on. My keys still in my hand. The air in the house felt wrong. I know that sounds ridiculous. Air is air, it doesn't feel like anything. But you know what I mean. That sense that a space has been disturbed. That someone else's presence is still hanging in the room like a residue. Stranger. Home. Smell. Someone had been in my house. I didn't move for a full minute. I stood there and listened. The heater hummed. The refrigerator cycled. The house was quiet. I called out, "Hello?" and hated the sound of my own voice, how small it was, how it cracked on the second syllable. No one answered. I checked every room. The closets. Behind the shower curtain. Under the bed. I checked the windows, all locked from the inside. The back door locked, deadbolt turned. Nothing was missing. Nothing was obviously disturbed. But Biscuit followed me through every room with her ears flat and her body low, and when we got back to the living room, she pressed the buttons again. Stranger. Home. Smell. Like she was frustrated I hadn't understood. Like she was saying, "I already told you." Someone was here. I called a friend, Sarah, the only person I knew in this city, and she talked me down. "Probably a maintenance worker," she said. "The landlord sends people sometimes without notice. Maybe a neighbor with a spare key checking on the pipes." Don't spiral, Emily. You're in a new place, you're stressed, the dog is picking up on your anxiety. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the next morning, I walked around the outside of the house before leaving for work, and I found it. A footprint. A single boot print in the soft mud beneath my bedroom window. Size 11, maybe 12. Deep, like someone had been standing there for a while. Standing and looking in. I called the landlord. He hadn't sent anyone. He didn't know of any maintenance scheduled. He said the previous tenants had had a spare key hidden under a decorative rock by the back. Door, standard practice, he said, in case of lockouts. I went to the back door. The rock was there. I lifted it. The key was gone. Someone had taken the spare key. Someone had let themselves in while I was at work. And my dog had smelled them. I changed the locks that day. Both doors. I went to the hardware store on my lunch break and bought new deadbolts, a chain lock for the front door, and 2 security cameras, one for the front porch, one for the backyard. I installed everything that evening while Biscuit sat on the couch and watched me, her ears tracking the sound of the drill. That night, she didn't press stranger. I almost slept. The cameras were motion activated and connected to an app on my phone. For 3 days, they captured nothing but squirrels and one very fat raccoon waddling across the back porch at 4 in the morning. I started to relax. The locks were changed. The key was gone. Whatever had happened, whoever had been in my house, they couldn't get in anymore. Then, on December 22nd, the office holiday party happened. And everything clicked into place with a sickening, vertiginous certainty. It was held in the conference room, cheap wine, a veggie tray, someone's Bluetooth speaker playing jazz. I was standing by the window, talking to a coworker named Lisa, when Dale walked over. He was wearing a green sweater and holding a plastic cup of Merlot, and he smiled at me the way he always smiled at me, too wide, too long, like he was studying my reaction. "Nice place you've got, Emily," he said. "Out on Hemlock, right? With the pine trees in the back?" I hadn't told anyone at work my address. I hadn't told anyone at work what street I lived on. I hadn't mentioned the pine trees. I looked at him and something must have shown on my face because his smile faltered, just for a second, just to flicker, before he recovered. "Someone mentioned it," he said. The same thing he always said. That night, I sat in my living room with every light on and went through my camera footage again. I looked more carefully this time. Not just at the motion alerts, but at the static footage, the hours of nothing. And at 2:47 a.m. on December 20th, I saw him. A figure. At the edge of the frame on the front porch camera. Standing on the sidewalk across the street. Just standing there. not moving. Hands in his jacket pockets, face obscured by the angle and the darkness. But the build was right. The height was right. He stood there for 11 minutes. Then he turned and walked away. I zoomed in. I couldn't see his face. But the jacket, a dark green field coat with a corduroy collar, I'd seen it every day for 3 months. It hung on the back of Dale's office chair. Biscuit pressed stranger. Smell. I know, baby, I whispered. I know who it is now. But knowing and proving are different things. I needed more. I needed his face on camera. I needed something I could take to HR, to the police, something concrete. So I did what I'm not proud of, but what I felt I had to do. I set a trap. I left the spare key, a new one, for the new locks under a different rock by the back door. I mentioned it casually at work, within earshot of Dale, while talking to Lisa. I'm so paranoid about locking myself out, I said, laughing. I hid a key under the blue pot by the back steps. It was a lie. There was no blue pot. But there was a key under the gray rock, and I figured if someone came looking, they'd look under everything. And I repositioned the back camera to cover the entire rear of the house, including the ground. 2 days before Christmas. December 23rd. I was at Sarah's apartment for an early holiday dinner. I'd left Biscuit at home with extra food and water and the TV on for company. She liked the sound of voices, it seemed to calm her. I was halfway through a glass of wine when my phone buzzed. Motion alert. Back porch camera. I opened the app. And there he was. Dale. Clear as day, or rather, clear as the cold white light of the motion-activated floodlight that had just snapped on. He was crouched by the back steps, his hands moving systematically under the planters, the mat, the rocks. Looking for the key. His face was turned toward the camera at one point, maybe 2 seconds of perfect, undeniable clarity. My supervisor. At my house. At 8:47 p.m. on December 23rd, looking for a way inside. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat very still and watched him search for 3 more minutes before he gave up and walked away, disappearing around the side of the house and into the darkness beyond the pine trees. Then I called the police. What followed was a blur of reports and statements and uncomfortable meetings. I filed a police report that night. I submitted the footage. I went to HR on December 26th, the first business day after Christmas, and laid everything out, the comments, the appearances, the footage, the footprint, Biscuit's alerts. They were horrified, or at least performed horror convincingly enough. Dale was suspended immediately. By January 3rd, he was terminated. The police issued a no-contact order, which was upgraded to a full restraining order after Dale sent me a series of text messages from a number I didn't recognize. The messages started coherent, apologetic, even. I never meant to scare you. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. You don't understand how much I care about you. Then they got darker. You ruined my life. I had nothing before this job and now I have less than nothing. You'll understand what it's like to lose everything. I can be patient. I have nothing but time now. The police took the messages seriously. They spoke to Dale. He denied sending them, said his phone had been stolen, said someone was setting him up. The messages stopped. The restraining order held. January passed. February. The days got longer. Biscuit stopped pressing stranger. I started sleeping through the night again, started leaving the porch light off sometimes, started feeling something that might have been safety, or at least the memory of what safety felt like. I almost let myself believe it was over. March arrived with rain. Heavy, relentless Pacific Northwest rain that turned the yard to mud and drummed on the roof in a constant, muffling roar. I liked it. The sound filled the silence. It made the house feel sealed, protected, wrapped in white noise. Biscuit seemed calmer too. She'd graduated to 24 buttons now, and she used them with a fluency that sometimes startled me. She'd press outside smell happy when the spring flowers started blooming in the neighbor's yard. She'd press love scratch bed when she wanted to cuddle at night. She'd press food water play in the morning like a checklist. The button board had become our language, a bridge between species, and crossing it every day felt like a small miracle. I started to forget about Dale. Not entirely, you don't forget something like that entirely, but the way you forget a bad dream as the day goes on. The edges blur. The urgency fades. He was gone. The locks were changed. The cameras were still running. Biscuit was calm. It was over. It was over. Until March 14th. I was in the kitchen, making dinner. It was a Friday evening, just past 7. The rain had stopped for the first time in days, and the silence it left behind felt enormous, almost physical, like the air was holding its breath. Biscuit was in the living room. I could hear her nails clicking on the hardwood. Then I heard the buttons. Stranger. I stopped stirring. Set the spoon down. Home. My heart rate spiked so fast I could feel it in my fingertips. Smell. I walked into the living room. Biscuit was standing at her board, her body rigid, her ears flat. She looked at me. Pressed the buttons again. Slowly. Deliberately. Like she was making sure I understood. Stranger. Home. Smell. No, I said. My voice sounded wrong. Thin. No, he can't be here. The restraining order. Biscuit pressed stranger again. I grabbed my phone. Pulled up the camera app. No motion alerts. Nothing on the front porch. Nothing on the back. I checked the live feeds, empty. Just the wet porch, the dark yard, the pine trees swing slightly in the still air. But Biscuit wouldn't stop. She pressed stranger again. And again. And then she pressed a button she had never pressed before in combination with stranger. Scared. Stranger. Scared. My dog was scared. In all the months of Dale, in all the nights of stranger. Night, she had never once pressed scared. She'd been alert. Watchful. Determined, even like she was doing her job, sounding the alarm. But not scared. Never scared. Now she was scared. I checked the house. Every room. Every closet. Every window. All locked. All secure. Nothing disturbed. Nothing out of place. The cameras showed nothing. The doors were solid. The chain was on. I sat down on the couch and pulled Biscuit into my lap. She was trembling. I could feel it through her whole body, a fine, constant vibration, like a tuning fork struck against something no one else could hear. It's okay, I told her. There's nobody here. You're safe. We're safe. She looked up at me with those dark, wet eyes, and I swear, I know how this sounds, I know, but I swear she looked sorry. Like she knew something she wished she didn't. Like she was trying to warn me about something I couldn't understand yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my phone on my chest, the camera app open, refreshing every few minutes. Biscuit was on the bed beside me. I'd invited her up, something I didn't usually do, and she was still trembling. Every so often she'd lift her head and stare at the bedroom door, ears straining forward, then settle back down with a small, anxious whine. At 1:17 a.m., I heard something. Not a button. Something else. A sound from outside. From the back of the house. A soft, wet sound, like something dragging through the mud. I stopped breathing. The sound moved. Along the back wall. Past the bathroom window. Past my bedroom window. Slow. Deliberate. The sound of someone moving through the wet earth, close to the house, close enough to touch the siding. I opened the camera app. The back porch camera showed nothing. No motion alert. No figure. Just the empty yard, the wet grass, the dark wall of pines. But the sound continued, that slow, dragging passage along the side of the house. Biscuit was rigid beside me. Not trembling anymore. Perfectly still. Her eyes were locked on the wall, the exterior wall, the one that faced the yard, and her lips were pulled back slightly, just enough to show her teeth. But she wasn't growling. She wasn't making any sound at all. The dragging stopped. Silence. Then, from the living room, a button. Stranger. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because I was in the bedroom, and Biscuit was in the bedroom, right beside me, her body pressed against my leg, her eyes fixed on the wall. And the button was in the living room. And no one had pressed it. Except someone had. Stranger. The voice was the same, tinny, mechanical, calm. But hearing it in the dark, knowing I was alone, knowing the dog was with me, knowing that those buttons required physical pressure, a deliberate press, night. I grabbed Biscuit. I grabbed my keys. I didn't grab my phone. I realized that later, at the motel, and the realization made me feel like the floor had dropped out from under me. I ran down the hallway in the dark. I didn't look at the living room. I didn't look at the button board. I went straight for the front door, fumbled with the chain, the deadbolt, threw it open, and ran to my car in my bare feet on the wet concrete. I drove. Biscuit sat in the passenger seat, silent, her ears flat. I drove 40 miles to a motel off the highway, checked in at 2 a.m., and sat on the bed with every light on, holding my dog, shaking. The next morning, I called Sarah. She came to the motel. She drove me back to the house. In the daylight, it looked the same as always, small, ordinary, harmless. We went inside together. The button board was undisturbed. The buttons were in their places. I checked the pressure, they worked fine, but they required a firm press. Not something a draft could trigger. Not something a vibration could set off. You had to push them. I checked the cameras. Nothing. No alerts. No footage of anyone approaching the house, entering the house, or being anywhere near the house. I checked the mud outside. The rain had been heavy, and any tracks from the night before were washed away. Or had never been there at all. Sarah looked at me with that careful expression people use when they think you might be falling apart. Maybe it was a malfunction, she said. Electronics glitch sometimes. 2 buttons, I said. 2 different buttons, in sequence. Maybe Biscuit pressed them before you went to bed and you heard the delayed playback or something. They don't have delayed playback. They play when you press them. She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. I went to work on Monday. I tried to be normal. I smiled at the right times and answered emails and pretended that I hadn't spent the weekend sleeping with every light on in a motel room, clutching a 7-pound dog like a lifeline. During my lunch break, I did something I'd been putting off. I looked up Dale. I don't know what I expected to find: a social media post, maybe, something that would tell me where he was, what he was doing, whether he was still in the area. I needed to know if there was a rational explanation. I needed to know if he'd violated the restraining order. I needed something concrete to take to the police. I found his name almost immediately. But not on social media. It was an obituary. Dale Marcus Thornton, age 41, of Portland, Oregon. Passed away on March 12, 2 days before Biscuit pressed stranger. Home. Smell. 2 days before the dragging sound outside my wall. 2 days before something pressed buttons in my empty living room while I hid in my bedroom with my dog. The obituary was brief. It said he was survived by a sister in California. It said he had worked in logistics. It said a private memorial service had been held. It did not say how he died, but the wording, the specific, careful phrasing, told me enough. If you or someone you know is struggling, please contact the National Crisis Lifeline. That line at the bottom. You know what it means. Dale had ended his life. On March 12th. 2 days before he came back to my house. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time after I read that. The screen blurred. My hands were shaking. I called the police, the same officer who'd handled my case, and asked him to confirm it. He did. Dale Thornton had been found in his apartment on March 12. Time of death was estimated at late evening on the 11th or early morning on the 12th. There was no question. No ambiguity. He was dead. He had been dead for 2 days when my dog smelled a stranger in our house. "Ma'am," the officer said. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here. Is there something else you need to report?" I almost laughed. What would I say? My dead stalker came back? My dog talks, and she says he's still here? I pressed the phone against my forehead and closed my eyes. "No," I said. "Nothing else. I went home that night. I don't know why. I should have stayed away. I should have broken the lease and moved and never looked back. But there was something pulling me, not toward the house, exactly, but toward an answer. Toward understanding. Because if it wasn't Dale, and it couldn't be Dale, because Dale was dead, then what was Biscuit smelling? What had she been smelling all along? Biscuit was waiting by the door. She pressed happy when I came in, then immediately pressed smell. Just smell. Not stranger. Not night. Just smell. "What do you smell, baby?" I asked. She looked at me. Looked at the hallway. Looked back at me. She pressed a new combination. One she'd never used before. Stranger. Home. Night. Scared. 4 buttons. The longest string she'd ever produced. And then she walked to the corner of the living room, the corner nearest the back wall, the wall that faced the pine trees, and lay down with her nose pointed at the baseboard, and she whimpered. A small, high, continuous sound. Like she was mourning something. Or warning me about something she could sense but I could not. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this from the motel. I went back for my things, clothes, the button board, Biscuit's food. I was in the house for less than 20 minutes. While I was packing, Biscuit pressed stranger twice. Both times, I was the only person in the house. Both times, the cameras showed nothing. I've contacted the landlord. I'm breaking the lease. He didn't fight me on it. When I told him I was leaving early, there was a pause on the line just a beat too long, and then he said, "I understand." Not why. Not, "Can we work something out?" Just, "I understand." Like the previous tenants. Like whoever was before them. Like everyone who lived in that house and left before their lease was up, with no explanation except the quiet, desperate need to be somewhere else. I keep thinking about what Biscuit knows. What she can sense that I can't. Dogs perceive the world through smell, a landscape of scent that's as vivid and detailed to them as sight is to us. They can smell disease. They can smell seizures before they happen. They can smell the chemical shift of fear on human skin. What if they can smell other things too? Things we don't have words for? Things that don't show up on cameras or leave footprints in the mud? Biscuit has 24 buttons. 24 words. A tiny vocabulary for a vast and terrifying world. And the word she keeps pressing, stranger, might not mean what I thought it meant. It might not mean a person. It might not mean Dale. It might mean something that was in that house long before Dale. Long before me. Long before anyone. Something that smells like a person but isn't one. Something that stands outside bedroom windows in the dark and waits. Something that knows how to press buttons. Last night, in the motel, I woke up at 2 a.m. Biscuit was standing on the bed, rigid, ears forward, staring at the motel room door. I looked at the button board. I'd set it up in the corner, habit, or maybe hope, the irrational belief that if she could tell me what she sensed, I could protect us from it. She jumped off the bed, walked to the board, and in the blue light of the alarm clock, in the silence of a motel room 40 miles from the house I'd already fled, she pressed one button. Stranger. I froze. Listened. The motel was quiet. The parking lot was empty, I could see it through the gap in the curtains. No footsteps. No dragging sounds. No shadows. Nothing. But Biscuit kept staring at the door. Her ears never dropped. Her body never relaxed. She stood there, between me and the door, the way she'd always positioned herself, between me and whatever was coming. And then she pressed one more button. The last button she pressed before I picked her up and held her and sat in the bathroom with the light on until morning. Home. Stranger. Home. Whatever it is, wherever I go, it followed us. It's not in the house on Hemlock Street. It was never in the house. It was never Dale. Dale was just the beginning, the logical explanation I clung to because the alternative was something I couldn't face. The stranger isn't outside anymore. Biscuit says it's home. And I believe her. I don't know what happens next. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to run from something that doesn't leave footprints, doesn't trigger cameras, doesn't show up in the daylight. Something only my dog can sense. Something that followed us 40 miles and was waiting at the door. All I know is what Biscuit tells me. And Biscuit has never been wrong. Stranger. Home. She presses it every night now. Every single night. And every night, I check the door. I check the windows. I check the cameras. And every night, there's nothing there. Nothing I can see. But Biscuit sees. Biscuit smells. Biscuit knows. And she is so scared. I taught my dog to use talking buttons. I thought it would bring us closer. I thought it would be a miracle of communication, a bridge between two minds. I was right. She told me everything. I just wish she hadn't.